Welcome to your Puncty Bite for the week of September 12th through the 16th. I hope that all of you had a marvelous weekend. I got to do a triathlon this morning in Fort Collins, so I have to say I'm in a pretty happy mood about it. It went really well, and I just had a great time, and it was a beautiful day. Only drawback was that it started at 7 a.m. this morning, which was a little early, but it was really, really, really great, and I hope all of you did something fun as well. I'm actually going to jump right into the Puncty Bite this week because we have a lot of scheduling and logistics that I want to talk about and just some tips for getting started on your first grading of the semester. So let's go ahead and talk about scheduling to start with, and I'll just pull over our schedule here and we can talk about first the labs that we'll be doing this week will be lab 5 and 6, and at the end of the week Richard and Craig, you are responsible for the open lab, so if someone could be there to help out with that. This is the first week that open lab should become just a little bit more laid back, as we won't be doing any staining this week. I also wanted to congratulate all of you on receiving the TA stipend, and to please go and see Sandy Decora if you have not already done so, to make sure that you have all of the paperwork filled out. Please do that no later than early this week. I really don't want someone to come to me and say, oh, mid-semester, oh, I haven't filled out that paperwork. That's not a good situation because it makes it look like you don't need that stipend and don't want that stipend, and I worry very much that will mean that we will lose those stipends, and that's not something that I want to do. And we got raises this time, so that is way cool, and I'm really stoked about it. So we want to show them our appreciation for those stipends, and certainly that money is very, very valuable to us. Okay, so get to Sandy Decora, talk to her, make sure you get your timesheets turned in at the end of every month too, so that you can get paid appropriately. Marvelous. So I think with respect to scheduling, the only other thing that I wanted to mention was to please get your pre-lab done for Lab 6, and I know Richard and Craig, nice job. You guys have already gotten that done, but go ahead and get in there and get ready with that pre-lab so that it can open on Tuesday at the end of your lab period. Another reminder also, just remember that we want to set those so that they don't open for the student to see their score and their answers until after we've gone through and put in the grades for those. So that's just an added thing I know to remember in that, but I really think that's working out better, is a little bit better system for the pre-labs. Okay, great. So other than that, if you haven't already had safety training, that's something you might want to think about doing tomorrow. I think most of you by now have gotten in to do that, but I just wanted to make sure I've made that reminder. The first grading assignments are going to happen pretty quick here because the gram stain report, of course, is going to be due on the 15th, so on Thursday, and likely that many of you will sit down to do that grading on the weekend. I generally have a rule of thumb with grading. I usually give myself the same amount of time to grade an assignment that I gave my students to submit that assignment, and I think that's a fair situation. So it gives you time, but not too much time to get that graded. As you are sitting down to grade the gram stain report, there are a few things to remember. Perhaps foremost is that your goal as a TA is to help students learn, and I have a saying that is, the goal of teaching is not to show students how much we know, but instead to allow them to realize their own capacity to know. And so when you grade an assignment, think to yourself, what benefit am I giving the student in the comments that I'm putting here or in the points that I'm deducting here? Why am I deducting points? And have I clearly noted on there why I have done so? If you can't write a note to a student telling them why you've deducted points, then don't deduct points. So make sure that there's a lot of clarity in the why behind that, and that you're deducting a point so that you will draw their attention to something that could be done better. And by that, I don't necessarily mean tiny little grammatical differences. For example, whether they capitalize gram in gram stain or not. That's done differently by nearly every textbook. I like to capitalize it, but not every textbook does. On the other hand, if there is a misunderstanding about why a gram-positive cell wall is different than a gram-negative cell wall, that's an important place to clarify, and something that you might deduct points so that they can understand, you know, that there is a problem there and that they need to understand that concept a little bit better. However, obviously, if grammar and punctuation is completely missing and throughout the document it's obvious that they haven't even taken time to spell check, that's where that point for quality comes in. So it is an important thing to look at quality, but it may not be an important thing to look for tiny ways that you can deduct points. Okay, good. In terms of grading the unknown press release, which will be submitted a week from Tuesday, so it's a while yet, but you may start getting going graded on it early. And I thought I'd go ahead and just take this time to mention that you do have a grading key on your TACD, and I'm going to bring that over here so I can show you that there is one that's called press release, and that is a grading key, and you can print those and attach them onto each student's report if you would like, or however you find is easiest to use that. That's probably the best way to do it. And if you do need to get copies, I can show you where you can make copies up on the 5th floor. Marvelous. I hope that's helpful with respect to grading, but also remember that I'm more than happy to sit down with you, particularly if it's the first time you've ever done any grading, and your senior TA can also sit down with you and help with ways that they've done that. Consistency in grading is always key, so if you take off a half a point on somebody's report and you make a note of why, please make sure that you do the same on everyone else's report so that, you know, they're only seeing one of those. Even though you're seeing 30 of them, it's hard for them to know what you're thinking unless you make a note on each person's grading key or what have you. Marvelous. Let's go ahead then and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this week in lab, and we will be performing labs 5 and 6. Things are going to get hectic on Tuesday when we're doing lab 5 because it is the first lecture exam. So I want to be sure that I'm available somewhat throughout the day to help monitor the chaos with that. And you can also feel free to help pass out exams and get students situated with exams. Those of you who have opted to help give the exam on, or help to give the lecture on that day, please talk to me about how you want to split up that lecture, because of course we will be doing the dilution problems that day, and if you are not comfortable with the section in explaining dilution problems, that is to say you don't feel really good with both methods, which I think it is a good idea for you as TAs to feel really good with both methods, but maybe you don't feel really good right now, then make sure that you have me take that part of the lecture, and perhaps you take the first part of the lecture in explaining the different kinds of media. If you do that first portion of the lecture, please do utilize the TA guidelines. There are a lot of things in the guidelines that will help you to do a better job in that section of the lecture. They're under this nutritional requirements for cultivation of bacteria, and it does talk about a little bit of added things that you can put in there along with your conversation of the major elements, the micronutrients, the different requirements for carbon and energy, and the different types of growth media, whether that be defined, undefined, selective, or differential. It's a great resource for you guys, and it helps so that as you're talking you have something to add to the lecture rather than just reading there what's on the slide, which a lot of you have been doing a marvelous job with that, and even those of you who are beginning, you know, really great effort on adding things to the lecture to help the students understand those analogies, that humor. Those things can really help. Okay, also during Lab 5, we need to start to announce to students that during Lab 7, they need to bring the reagents to make the Winogradsky column. That is, they need to group up with groups of 4 and decide who will bring the mud, who can bring the water. If they need extra jars, I do have some extra jars, but it's a great time in the fall to go out and collect what's needed for the Winogradsky column. So please do help your students in remembering to get that, and we'll try to write that on the board as well. well. Also during Lab 5, one of the two TAs should be ready to demonstrate aseptic culturing technique. And once again, remember that demoing something for teaching purposes isn't always the same as knowing how to do it yourself. You need to think about how you'll explain that process. And that's why I've written this helpful portion in the TA guideline. I think for aseptic pipetting, it's probably easier not to use the doc cam, though when we get to lecture 6 and you're doing T-streaking, I think it's very, very helpful to do the T-streaking using the doc cam. It helps students see the details of what you're doing, and you know, picking up isolated colonies and things like that are a little bit clearer. So then that brings us to Lab 6, which we'll be doing on Thursday, and in that lab we'll be doing environmental influences. So this is a really fun lecture, and I've actually added a new picture, a picture of when we were skiing this summer on June 19th up in the Snowies, and you can see an awesome band of the red algae, and I have that in the lecture. It's not on your TACD, but it is in the lecture, so if you want to show that off, you can. Please feel free to take your time with the lecture and give some great examples on this particular one, because it is, although it is a encompassing lecture, the lab takes not much more than 5 to 10 minutes for the students to complete. So don't worry that it will take an hour or 2 hours to do the lab, when in fact it really only takes 10 minutes really for the students to get done with that. And that's partly because they do split the different environmental influences. One note also, at the beginning of Lab 6, we're going to be summarizing the dilution problem data, and it's really, really helpful if you can go around right away at the beginning of Lab 6 and help the students to get their values, because this is one of the hardest things they do, figuring those dilution problems. So that can be very helpful to go around and help them do that. This is also the time that we're going to want to assign the dilution problems and get them started working on those. We can give them a large window of time to work on those, and we can decide exactly what we want that due date to be, but probably between a week and a half to complete those dilution problems, so that we know that they have time to really do a good job on those. Certainly, again, one of the hardest things that they are faced with this semester, so we want to reach our hands out to help them work on those, and whether that be during Friday Open Lab or during a special session that we set for dilution work, it's either way is fine. Okay, this one again, you need to prepare for the streaking demonstration, and I do write how to go about that, the streak plate technique. And so one TA want to choose to do that streak plate demo and be ready to show that under the doc cam, and again, be ready to talk about it for teaching purposes, not just purposes of knowing how to do it, because I know you all know how to do it, but it's also a different thing to teach it. Marvelous. I think that brings us to the end of our Puncti Bite for this week. Please don't hesitate to ask me if you have questions, and I can't wait to see you on Tuesday.